Hi, everybody. Right now we're going to go through some of the high points from the movie chapter in your books. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. What do your favorite movies say about you? Well, they say a lot. In fact, that's one of the reasons that we do that activity on the very first day of class. You can learn so much about someone based on what their favorite movie is. For example, gentlemen, if you're on a date and she tells you that her favorite movie is The Notebook, you know that you better really pump up your romance game, right? There's certain things. And ladies, if you're on a date and the guy tells you that his favorite movie is The Human Centipede, then you know it's time to end the date early. Okay. Here's a quote from your book that says that the most popular movies tend to make the world clearer and more manageable. And I think that's kind of an ironic quote considering what the top 16 movies based on box office really do. Not many of these movies are actually set in our world, which is ironic since they're supposed to make our world seem more clearer and understandable. They don't. In fact, this is a chart from Box Office Mojo. This is all-time box office. If you look at this list, they have a few things in common. Very few of them are based in reality. Many of them are fantasy, sci-fi films from that genre. And there's a reason for that. Fantasy and sci-fi tend to translate very well into other countries because the States is not the primary market for Hollywood anymore. They want a global audience. And if you set a movie in the middle of Missouri, it might not translate very well to China or Holland. But if you set it in Middle Earth, it's a different story. It doesn't necessarily seem American, okay? Now, I know that the Lord of the Rings movies were filmed in New Zealand, but it was an American company that distributed them. Okay, so most of these are sci-fi fantasy movies. Most of them also come from stories that were present before the movie was created, meaning that it has a built-in audience. We knew that the Titanic was going to sink. Avatar, you might say that it's an original story. It's not. It's just Dances with Wolves with blue people. Ask your parents about this. I'm completely right. Many of these movies are based on comic book characters or successful books or successful franchise films. There's not a lot of risk taken on this list. Toy Story 3, you don't think they knew that was going to make $1 gazillion? Of course it was. It's a Toy Story movie. It's a Pixar movie. Okay? Iron Man 3, same thing. Transformers, oh God, make the Transformers movies done. Okay, sorry, I'm ranting. Your book talks about production values of movies. You need to be familiar with what that actually means. I love the music in movies. That's my favorite thing. Editing can change everything. Color makes a big difference. We'll talk about this in class, but if you change the editing, you can totally change the story, and I'll show you some of these fun examples. Color can change the story, add the story, differentiate time and space, or add impact. If you've seen Schindler's List, you know I'm talking about the girl in the red coat. If you've seen Saving Private Ryan, you know that it was washed out. Spielberg reduced the color in Saving Private Ryan so that it would look more like a newsreel or have that war feeling. It's not a warm movie. There's no warm colors in it. Music. We're going to play a wonderful movie music game in class. Get excited. There's prizes. I think sometimes music is even more important than some of the characters in movies. And some movie music is just iconic. And the power of music in a movie cannot be overstated. So let's talk about the history of movies, at least a little bit. The whole idea is based on the concept of persistence of vision. What that means is that your eyes, for 1/24th of a second, keep the image in them. So if you have a picture that moves at least 24 times a second, your eye will think that is movement. Fun, huh? Okay. So how did movies get started? Well, Hannibal Goodwin invented something called celluloid. And what that was basically, it looked like Scotch tape, but it wasn't sticky. And it had lots of squares in a row. And every square had an image that was changed just a little tiny bit. So that when you put the celluloid in a kinetoscope, which was like a big wooden box, looked like binoculars, you could wind the celluloid past your eyes in this kinetoscope, and it looked like movement, right? Because you were moving the squares past your eyes at more than 24 per second. So the kinetoscope is a way to watch movies, but you can only do it alone. And as we know, usually movie watching is something that we do in a group. It's a community event. And that's thanks to the Lumiere brothers. They developed a projection system where you could take the celluloid and project it against a wall or against a sheet hanging from a wall. Okay. One of the first movies officially, is called Arrival of a Train. And Thomas Edison did this with the Lumiere brothers. See, I told you we would be talking about Thomas Edison every week in this class. The interesting thing, and I'll show this to you in class because it's actually a really boring clip, but the interesting thing about it is that when people in Paris saw this movie and saw a train coming at them, they panicked because they thought that it was going to break through the back wall of the theater. I know. If you're interested in film, you know all about Edwin Porter. He was actually the first director. What he did was use montages and cutting of film to tell a story. He did the first Western, which is The Great Train Robbery. It's boring. Ugh, it's boring. The reason that it's boring for us is that each scene lasts about 45 seconds. And if you know anything about our attention spans and the typical scene length in American film and television, you know that it's much shorter than that. So it's boring, but it's significant. There you go. The very first movie theaters were called Nickelodeons, of course. They used Lumiere's projection system. They were silent. Typically, sound effects or piano playing was added. They were referred to as democracy's theater in your books for two reasons. Everyone could attend because it was cheap, cost a nickel. Everybody could attend, and it really helped the immigrants learn English because you're looking at the beginning of the 19th century, and that's when the huge influx of immigration was taking place, so it helped people learn English. There's three main parts of the film industry. There's production, distribution, and exhibition. What you and I are most familiar with is exhibition because we go see movies. Production, obviously, is in the making of movies. Distribution is getting the movies from the production phase to the exhibition phase. So in the early stages, people started to want certain genres of movies and certain performers. In fact, names weren't listed on credits until 1910, and that's because of a woman named Mary Pickford. She was the first big movie star, and she was also the first person to say, "I don't get out of bed for less than $10,000. Good for her. So the studio system is born, right? They were making movies on an assembly line basis, movies after movies after movies. And back then, if you were an actor or an actress, you worked for a specific studio. Okay, Joan Crawford, she worked for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. That was her studio. They controlled every part of her life, including publicity about her private life. So the actors were not freelancers like they are now working for any studio. They worked for one studio and they made movies for that studio, and those studios protected their performers from bad publicity. Actors have more freedom to work with other studios now, but no one protects them from bad publicity. If you think, you might hear older people say, "Oh, well, movie stars today just misbehave so badly." The thing is that they don't misbehave more than movie stars in previous times. It's just that we know about it now. Okay. Distribution is the next phase in the movie industry. A couple terms you need to know. Block booking is what distributors used to do to movie theater owners. And they would say, "Okay, you can have our big blockbuster for the summer, but you got to have these other crappy movies too, and you got to show them all." Well, look at it this way. I mean, if you own a movie theater and Marvel says to you, "You can have Guardians of the Galaxy, but you got to show all these other crappy movies," you say yes, right? Because you want Guardians of the Galaxy. You want the big hit movie. Anyway, that is actually not allowed anymore, block booking. Interesting to note how two events in history affected the movie industry. First one was World War I. Up until World War I, Europe was making just as many films as Hollywood was. But where was World War I fought? In Europe. So Europe basically stopped making movies during that time period. Hollywood ramped up its movie production, and Europe never caught up with Hollywood. So really, right now, Hollywood and India are the two big movie producers. September 11th had a different effect. Two ways. Any movie that was in the distribution or production phase that had a terrorism theme were shelved. That meant it was just put on the back burner and it stopped production. But also, movie attendance went way up after September 11th. And there's different theories about why that happened, but my theory is that people got tired of watching the news. You might not realize this, but for a solid week after those attacks on that Tuesday morning, it was nothing but news on almost every channel. So if you wanted to avoid any information about September 11th, and who didn't, you had to go to the show. And that's what people did. So there's two different types of distribution. One is typical, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles opens on 3,700 screens. Okay, they're trying to get the biggest bang for their buck on opening weekend. That's the opposite of something called a platform rollout. And a studio might use a platform rollout for a movie that's not typically blockbuster material, but they want to start it small, maybe generate word of mouth and some critical acclaim, and then open it on larger screens later. And that's what The King's Speech was a platform rollout. It only started on 4 screens. And then, of course, it went on to win Best Picture Oscar a couple years ago. The exhibition phase hit its heyday in the 20s and 30s because they built movie palaces. Now, when I say palace, I'm not kidding. Like, for example, the Fox Theater in St. Louis is an elaborate, gorgeous theater. It was a movie house. And guess what studio built it? 20th Century Fox. Right? So what studio's movies did they show in the Fox Theater? 20th Century Fox. Okay. Now, I don't think it shows movies very often. If you ever get a chance to see a movie at the Fox Theater, go, go, go. It's phenomenal. Phenomenal. Now we have multiplexes. The one down the street from me has 20 screens, stadium seating, swivel seats, waiter and waitress service. It's awesome. Of course, it costs you an arm and a leg to go, but you know, we're used to that. Isn't that sad? I'm totally programmed to spend $15 on popcorn and a soda when I go to the show. That's just crazy. Okay, so the term vertical integration is when one company controlled the production, the distribution, and the exhibition of a media product. And with the movie industry, it was very obvious. Think of it this way. 20th Century Fox would make the movies, distribute the movies, and exhibit the movies at their Fox theaters. Well, the Paramount decision by the Supreme Court in 1948 made that illegal. So vertical integration is still illegal. It is illegal for any company to control the production, distribution, and exhibition of any media product, but that started with the movies. How did movies compete with TV? Because remember, TV started really coming along in the 50s. By the 60s, almost everybody had a TV, and people were used to staying home to be entertained. So how did the movies compete? They covered topics that TV wouldn't touch. So suddenly, there's movies about adultery, pedophilia, porn, I mean, super violent stuff that you weren't going to see on the Ed Sullivan Show on TV. And you know what, to an extent, movies still do compete with TV in that way. So we all know what the term blockbuster is, what the characteristics of a blockbuster, we'll talk about that in class, but did you know that almost all movies are considered financial failures because they do not make back the money that it cost to make the movie? Hollywood pays for those losers with blockbusters. Okay, blockbusters typically happen in the summer. There's usually all sorts of merchandise tie-ins with Burger King or McDonald's. And these huge multinational corporations that own the movie studios use all of their other products to help promote that film. That's called synergy. So for example, if Warner Brothers has a movie coming out, they're going to have all their stars show up on the Ellen DeGeneres Show, which is also produced by Warner Brothers Television. See how that works? They'll make sure that the stars are also on the cover of People magazine and Entertainment Tonight because they're both owned by Time Warner. So it's all related. And that's, you know, blockbusters, another term for blockbuster is a tentpole movie. And, you know, that's a metaphor for thinking that this blockbuster, the money that this blockbuster makes is going to be the tentpole that keeps the whole studio afloat for the rest of the year. It's a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure. Okay, so do special effects make a movie a hit? Nope. Of course they don't. Mars Need Moms was one of the most expensive movies ever made. I think it was crazy. An animated movie cost over like $150 million and it only brought in $39 million. So it was a bomb, even though it was digitally created. Then there was the movie Paranormal Activity, which was made in 7 days, and I think only cost $15,000, and it made millions, hundreds of, I think over $100 million. It's really all about story. You know, a good story is still going to make a great movie, regardless of what the special effects are. Right? Oh, we're going to talk about product placement. Of course, I have to include a clip from one of my favorite movies of all time. The product placement in this movie was amazing. James Bond is big in product placement. Oh, who's that? Kristen Stewart, the actress that only has one expression in the Twilight movies. She has an Apple laptop. I mean, it's constant. In fact, your book mentions that product placement has gone one step further, and now there's a type of movie called a branding movie, where the brand actually works with the studio to create stories that make the brands look good. You know, we're like so jaded now with commercials and things that product placement is really the best way to sell us anything because we can't change the channel. If it becomes a part of the story, well, we can't skip it. You know? What kind of car does James Bond drive? What kind of beer does he drink? Okay. How does he like his martini? We know these things because it's a part of who he is. Okay. That's our movies. We're going to have a great time in class this week. I'm going to show you some fun stuff. We're going to play a cool game about movie music. And remember, let me know if you have questions or follow-ups after this, and I'll see you in class. Bye.